Welcome. This is the homeschooling group. And what class is this?
This is going to be our history class, and it's going to be about World War after.
After World War I. So we finished up World War I, talking about all that. America got involved, the Allies won, lots of stuff happened overseas, and now we're going to kind of pull back and talk about what was going on in America and sort of this time period of the 1920s, which is called the Roaring Twenties.
The Roaring
Twenties. Alright, everybody get that out of your system. Wow, you guys are weird. Okay, so Roaring Twenties. So this time period, again, right after World War I, you got to think about how the war affected the United States and everything that was going on, how it affected people at the time. World War I was a big war. Again, it was the First World War, the first war that had a ton of countries involved. There's a lot of people that died. It was, this big thing, and people were like, it's kind of like, is the world gonna end? And, whatever else. So when that war is over, there was a lot of relief and things like that, and people came back home from the war. Women had to pick up a lot of jobs that were left behind by the men who went off to fight in the war. Men come back home and they want to chill out and have fun, and I think that's sort of like one of the ideas that you could say sort of defines this time period is it's a time of prosperity, and people kind of just they want to let loose and have fun, and then also I would say another kind of big defining characteristic of this time period is a lot of social change. And again, part of this driven by, women taking up some of the jobs and things like that in World War I. And remember, World War I was also the first time that women were actually allowed to join the military. So as a result of this, there's a lot of changes going on. Women still can't vote at this point in time, right? So that was one of the changes that happened now is in this time period now, women get the right to vote. So before it was only men.
Why?
Why? What do you mean why?
Why were only boys allowed to vote? Is there any reason?
It was, so ever since America has been a country, it sort of started off, they'd say like only rich white men got to vote. And it's sort of as our country has changed, people have gotten, more types of people have gotten the right to vote. And again, a lot of this was driven by social change. It might surprise you to learn that a lot of the opponents to women being able to vote were actually women. Part of the reason for this, and what is sort of like the main argument for women that opposed the right for women to vote, was because they were afraid that it would sort of contribute to the breaking up of families. Right. So as things were changing in the country, and there were more sort of like single women, single men, things like that, it became more of an issue of women not being able to vote. Back, before World War I, and, certainly as you go farther back into history, it was kind of like everybody was married, right? And if you were in your 20s, certainly by the time you're mid-20s, you're married and you're having kids and so on and so forth. And that's like basically everybody. Like it was almost unheard of for someone to be like in their 30s and not married and have kids. It was very rare. Contrast that with today, where there's a lot of people who are, in their 30s and either single or they got married, but then they got divorced, and they have kids, and sometimes they have kids, but they're not married, and so things have certainly changed a lot since then. And back then in the 1920s, it was kind of in that in-between state where things aren't as bad as they are now, where I think unfortunately family structure, in America, family structure has kind of been destroyed to a large degree. Families like ours, where it's like you have a mommy and a daddy and kids, and uh, me and mommy got married and we had kids and we're gonna stay together forever. Family like ours is, I'm not gonna say it's not rare, but it's a family like ours used to be completely normal, and now it's like I think they say like it's 50-50. So like half of the people that get married end up getting divorced and stuff like that.
That's crazy.
So families like ours, where you have a mommy and a daddy, and they get married and they have kids, like this is not what we have, is not the normal anymore, unfortunately. But back then in the 1920s, again, it was kind of in this in-between stage where, let's say you go another 100 years before that, and it's like basically everybody was like, get married, have kids, and all that stuff, and have a family and stay with your family. And that was very, very normal. 1920s, things are starting to shift. And and so because there were more like single women and things like that, it became more of a necessity to have women have the right to vote. Before that, it was kind of like the husband voted, and it was sort of like he voted for the family, right?
So votes were a lot more worthwhile.
I guess you could say that, yeah. But the point is, like, and this was why the women who, obviously not every woman was opposed to it, but I'm saying like some were, and the ones that were, was like they felt like, well, I don't need the right to vote because my husband votes and I agree with my husband. And so like, why do I need to vote also? Right. And again, if you have a society where pretty much everybody has, a husband and wife and kids, then that kind of makes sense. You don't really need to have husbands and wives and everything to have separate votes. But if you have a society where there's a lot more divorce, a lot more people who aren't getting married and things like that, then yeah, it becomes a lot more necessary to have men and women separately being able to vote and stuff like that.
If you don't want to vote, just don't vote.
Well, yeah, but the point is, and again, I'm not saying this is correct, but I'm saying this is the argument that they made, is that if you allow women to vote, then it's going to encourage women to be more independent, and it's going to discourage women to, basically get married and have kids and be part of a family. So that was the argument that they were essentially making. Anyway, it passes, it's a law, women are able to vote, cool. The other big thing, well, there's a lot of things that happened in this time period. One of the other big ones, and again, this was a time period where society was changing, and we sort of talked about how when it started, now people will call America a Christian nation. I don't think it is. I don't think it ever has been, in the sense that we've never been a nation where a majority of people are Christians. But our country was founded on principles that came from Christianity, and while, especially in the beginning, I don't think everyone or most people were Christian, but they certainly respected the Bible, and they thought about God at the very least, and they, there was that respect for Christianity and Christian morals and Christian principles. And so even if they weren't necessarily Christians, they looked at Christianity in the Bible and said, this is good, and this is the kind of thing that we want in our society. I would say that changed. I would say that really, really started to change around the 1960s. So we're not quite there yet. But in the 1920s, there was definitely, it was like, I would say in the 1960s was kind of like the really big turning away from Christianity in terms of America. But I would say a lot of it sort of started in the 20s. And, so it sort of like started turning away from God very slowly, and then really in the 60s it kind of took off. So one of the other big things that's interesting to study here that happens in the 1920s is prohibition. So prohibition is, what does it mean to prohibit something? Do you know what that word means?
Like, don't you do that?
Yeah, to prohibit something is to say you can't do it.
No.
Right? No. So prohibition, when we say prohibition, we're talking about prohibition of alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So alcohol, like hard liquor, beer, that kind of stuff, wine, the stuff that gets you drunk. Right?
No.
Which you kids shouldn't worry about, because you don't get to do it anyway. But
no, neither.
Back in the 20s, again, culture was still, and to a large degree, had that influence of Christian morality, but there was a lot of people sort of starting to turn away from that. And one of the ways that the people who kind of wanted to hold on to that Christian morality, one of the ways they tried to sort of pull that back was through this idea of prohibition. And so the idea being that, alcohol contributes to, people get drunk, and it's causing problems in families and all this stuff, and so we need to just prohibit it, stop it. And so this passed. This was a constitutional amendment that passed, prohibiting the sale of alcohol, and it didn't last very long.
Yeah, people just ignored it.
Yeah, people kind of just ignored it. There was a lot of things that happened. I don't think your book talks about this, but there actually was, the government, to get people to stop drinking alcohol, would actually poison stuff, which you can argue that whether drinking alcohol is bad and everything, but I definitely don't think you should be poisoned to death for drinking alcohol.
Was it bad? Is it stomach bug poison, or was it bad poison?
Well, again, dosage makes the poison, and you drink a little bit of it, you get sick. You drink a lot of it, you potentially die. Because alcohol was officially prohibited, they had what was called speakeasies in a lot of the cities, where a speakeasy was kind of like a secret club. Club is not like a club, like a treehouse kind of club, but club is in a nightclub, dance club, Where adults will like go out to like have parties and drink and dance and whatever. And so they had these like speakeasies where you go in and it's kind of like you got to have the password to get in, but you go in and they would have dancing and whatever, and they'd serve alcohol and stuff like that at these speakeasies. So it was a way for them to get around. What?
So the government poisoned it?
Yeah, there was, again, not all beer, not whatever, but there were times at which like and I don't know if it was like FBI or police or whatever, but this happened where they would actually poison alcohol so that people would get sick if they drank it.
That's stupid, but
I mean,
not quite.
I don't think that's very nice. And
People shouldn't go out drinking though.
Yeah, well,
you
so
shouldn't get drunk. It can hurt you to get drunk, but you shouldn't. If you get really, really drunk, I don't think you should die because you got poisoned.
right, yeah, and that's sort of the problem with it, right? Like, whether or not you think people should be drinking and stuff like that, getting drunk, certainly getting drunk is bad, and Bible, calls that out as a sin. That we, especially as Christians, we shouldn't be going out and getting drunk. But even for, non-Christians, it's like, it's not good for people to go out and get drunk. But even if you think that the government should do something to stop it, it's kind of like the punishment should fit the crime, right? And so, like, if somebody's going out and getting drunk during Prohibition, it's like, well, maybe you get like a fine, or you go to jail for a few days or a week, or like whatever.
But you shouldn't.
And somewhere some punishment around there. That's pretty reasonable.
But don't poison it.
Being poisoned and potentially even dying because of that, like nobody, I don't think anybody in their right mind would say we should have the death penalty for drinking alcohol, right? And so that's, again, it's a very disproportionate response where the punishment is way more severe than the crime.
Especially if you don't tell them you're poisoning it, because then.
Well, yeah.
Well, you wouldn't, because nobody's gonna drink it if it's poison.
Yeah, but if you don't tell them, then they'll just do their normal drinking, and then they'll get really drunk, and then they'll die because of that.
Yeah. Anyway, so Prohibition didn't last very long. Most historians basically say Prohibition essentially caused the rise of organized crime. So when we say organized crime, we're talking about things like mafia, mob, gangsters, whatever. A bunch of criminals working together, forming a criminal network. This as opposed to, somebody who, like, I don't know, I'm going to go steal a TV or whatever. Where it's just like you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not just like somebody who they're going to do crime, whatever, for their own purposes. But it's like a bunch of criminals working together as their job. And the reason that Prohibition sort of created that is because when alcohol was banned, you still had a bunch of people in the country who wanted to drink. And so now you've got something, alcohol, that a bunch of people in the country want that you can only get illegally. And so there was a bunch of criminals that got really rich off of basically forming a network of like, we're going to be the people who get alcohol to everybody. So one of the big names that you will hear in history is like Al Capone. He's probably the most famous criminal mobster in the world.
I've never heard of him.
Well, I know, but you're in the history class now. This is where you're hearing him. We haven't studied this time period before. But like most people Well, most people will have heard of Al Capone. And he was just, again, a very famous gangster with like a criminal network. And, made a lot of money by supplying alcohol to people and companies during Prohibition.
Was he as rich as the president?
Probably richer. So I think that's probably a good place to stop for today. On that note, you've been watching Homeschooling Scientist. Peace out.
Bye.
We never have fun. Well, you just do school, and then I throw you in a cage.